place when I went on a camping trip with my girlfriend to some national park in Canada. We hadn't been camping for a while now and decided we'd get away for a couple of days together. And also, we hadn't had special travels with each other either, so we thought that would be a good idea overall. Anyways, it was around lunchtime on a Friday and we packed our stuff into the car and hit the road. The drive wasn't that far, considering my girlfriend and I lived near the area at the time, which I don't like at all, especially after telling this story. Now, a few hours had passed on the trip and we started to get a bit tired from the long drive on the dusty road. So we eventually got to our camp spot and set up our camp fairly quickly so we could settle in and relax. I remember my girlfriend soon after we had set up camp went for a lay down in the tent to read a book or something. I myself was wandering around the place looking for firewood for a fireplace we were going to have later. As I was in the woods and scrub bushes, I hear my girlfriend scream out by something. I dropped the wood I had in my hands and dashed back to the campsite, and my wife stood there. She had this disturbed impression on her face like she had seen something horrific or terrifying. I asked, "Honey, what's wrong?" "I don't know, something was outside scratching on the tent," she replied. I thought she was just freaking out and I told her it just could have been a small animal. And the next set of words she said made me feel on edge. The word she said was, "No, because I called out if it was you," and someone else answered in a voice. Now as soon as she said that, I scanned through all the trees and area of our campsite looking for whoever this person was. I asked my wife if she was being dead serious about it, and she was. I yelled out to ask who was out there and that would want to come forward now. And then, as I turn my back, I see some tall figure standing next to a tree. It had to be some person or that, but they were so tall, like legit standing 8 feet tall. It was very disturbing. Then the figure steps behind a tree and disappears out of our view. Now, I couldn't sleep that night, nor could my girlfriend, but the next day came around eventually. We loaded up the car and got out of there no time early in the morning. To make the story even creepier, as we were turning onto the main road to exit the camp, I see all camp gear spread around the ground. Our camp gear, mind you. So, whatever or whoever that was, they went through our campsite whilst my girlfriend and I slept. We got our remaining gear off the floor and drove away from that place. We reported it to the National Park Ranger about it, but they said we were just over-exaggerating things. But whatever that thing was my girlfriend and I saw, I never ever want to come across it again. I once took a camping trip up to Colorado with my 2 friends, Eric and Luke. We had no plans that week, so we decided to pack our fishing gear and camping gear and go for a trip. I myself didn't go camping that much as a kid. Being 20 years old and only gone camping twice for that kind of sucked. But luckily, Eric and especially Luke, they did this stuff all the time and knew the place we were going. We got to a location around 5 PM late afternoon, and I remember the place being very spread open, like a lot of trees around the area, a nearby lake, and a massive landscape. To be honest, it was a quite beautiful spot there. It was peaceful, and nobody was around too, so we had the whole place to ourselves pretty much. Now a few hours had passed, we were drinking and listening to music and stuff close to midnight. We decided to call it a night and headed to our tents to sleep. We all slept in the tent we brought. It was a 4-man, so us 3 would have quite a lot of room to share in. Anyways, on to the creepy part of the story. I woke up to some shuffling of twigs and leaves breaking and snapping outside our tent. Now I don't know what time it was, but it was very, very early in the morning. I woke up and peeked my head outside. Someone or something was wandering outside near our campsite. I woke up Eric and Luke, then eventually told them about the sound too. They heard it as well, and this was pretty close to our tent also. So with confusion and quite on edge, I opened my bag and pulled out my travel flashlight. Then, with a click and then a shine of the torch beam, There outside of the tent stood a person dressed in some black, scabby-looking clothes, looking directly at us. It was a male, like late 40s. He had the freakiest face I could ever come across. The guy starts yelling and shit and begins to walk to us, so us three boys sprint out of the tent. We grabbed our gear as fast as we could and ran away from this creep, out to Luke's car. This guy had to be from some psycho ward or something, to the point we were thinking if he lived out here based on how dirty and gross he looked. As we got into our car, Luke pretty much put the pedal to the floor the whole way back out onto the highway. From that camping trip, I've always hated camping, and really wanted to know who that guy was and what he wanted from us.
This happened a few years back when I was still in college. I attended a school that is in a very bad area, an area filled with prostitution, drugs, gang violence. Despite all of this, the school is actually pretty good and is usually relatively safe as long as you're not out too late and as long as you stay on campus. Well, my mistake was I was not home before nightfall. At that time, I worked on campus, and after my shift, I started doing some homework. I lost track of time, and before I knew it, the cleaning crew arrived, and I was told I had to leave. I checked the clock, and it's now 10:30 p.m. I normally walked home from work, as I only lived maybe one block off campus. However, tonight I decided to call the safety escort service just to be safe. So I call and they quote me 10 minutes. I wait 10 minutes and then go outside, effectively locking myself outside of the building. I thought this would be okay because a safety escort was supposed to be here any minute, except they were running late. After about 5 minutes of waiting, I debate on just walking home. No one is out here except this one man across the street from where I exited the building, so I figured it was relatively safe to walk back. He's coming from the direction I would need to walk in, though, so I decide to be safe and wait for him to pass. Thank God I did. As soon as the man reaches the parking lot I'm in, instead of heading past me, he does a sharp turn and starts walking towards me. He starts shouting aggressively at me, something along the lines of, "How much, you whore?" As I mentioned before, there is an area known for prostitution, so I figured he must have mistook me for a prostitute. So I shouted back, "I'm not a sex worker. I'm a student." He keeps coming closer, still muttering angrily under his breath. At this point, I'm scared, but I'm still wondering if this is some sort of misunderstanding. So I shout, "Do not come any closer. You're scaring me." I was trying to be as clear as I could, using body language too in case he didn't speak English. He doesn't listen and keeps approaching, still muttering angrily. At this point, I'm not listening to what he is saying, but trying to look for a way to escape because he's not backing down. I notice he has a distinctive limp, but I'm in heels and not sure I can outrun him. I automatically dart back from my building and start pounding on the door, hoping the cleaning crew would hear me. No one heard me. As soon as he sees me run, he starts charging at me. At this point, I can't see this being a misunderstanding, and I'm sure his intentions are bad. I look around me and notice a blue safety light, a little bit past my building in the opposite direction, and I drop my bag and sprint for it. I hear his footsteps behind me. I push the button and I'm connected with campus safety, and I immediately yell my location, and that a man is approaching me right now, and looks like he's about to hurt me. He's still charging at me, almost to me, but I don't want to be disconnected from the police, so I stay at the safety light and yell at him I'm talking to the police right now. Campus police say they are on their way. Here is some background. This took place in 2007. I know that because I was in 4th grade and I was 9 at the time. We lived in a large neighborhood, and at that time it was surrounded by farmland. My house is a 1-story home. When you stand in the doorway of my room, you can see the front door, the kitchen on the left, and my brother's room straight ahead. Turning your head to the left, you can see the living room and my parents' room. You can get from my parents' room to the front door in less than a minute. For a while, we had been getting calls from jail. We had a home phone that had caller ID. 3 times a day for a week, our phone would call, and the caller ID would say jail. We had no relation to jail at all. No police came to the house, nothing. We never answered these calls. My mom always said that if they don't leave a voicemail, then it isn't important. They never left one, so we didn't answer. They always seemed to call in the morning, afternoon, and evening. One day, we only got one call. We thought that was weird, but didn't care. That night, I was in my room playing quietly. I remember playing with my Madeline doll, and I decided to go to bed. The time was around 9 p.m. When I put my head on the pillow, the doorbell rang. Well, this was the time my dad would be getting home, so I thought it was my dad playing with me. The doorbell rang again, and again, and again. I got scared and clutched my doll and ran to my mom's room. She was awake and watching TV. I told her someone was ringing the doorbell. She paused the TV and the doorbell rang. Just kept ringing. She immediately got my brother and sister. The ringing stopped. She looked through the peephole and saw a black figure of some sorts, but couldn't make it out. She did mention she didn't know if it was a person or something else. She was too afraid to turn the porch light on. She went back to her room and the ringing continued, and then the knocking started. It didn't sound like someone was trying to break in. It sounded like casual ringing and knocking, but it just kept going. Then it went faster and more intense. I got scared and started crying. "Mommy, make it stop. Make it stop." My mom called my dad to get home now. He was 30 minutes away, and we endured intense ringing and knocking for what seemed an eternity. The longer we waited, the more vicious it sounded. Then it stopped. We sat in silence, and the only light being the TV. Then the garage opened. My mom had this sense of fear in her eyes as the garage went up. She held on to my infant sister tightly and braced herself to protect us. "Anne, it was my dad. Tell me when you arrived." My dad didn't see anything. His lights were on when he pulled into our street, but he drove slowly. He saw no car driving past him, or anyone. My brother and I started to head back to our rooms when the ringing started. We froze. The ringing and knocking continued viciously. My dad ran towards the front door and swung it open. No one was there. Nothing. My dad ran around the house. Nothing. The calls from jail stopped. We keep our porch light on now, and whenever the doorbell rings, I do get nervous and keep quiet. I'm afraid that one day it might happen again. Edit. We built our house, and we still live there, so it is impossible that someone could have lived there before. We also never called the police because my mom thought they wouldn't take us seriously over ringing the doorbell and knocking on our door. We installed a Ring a year ago, and I don't really have a fear of the doorbell ringing anymore. July 2017. 4 teens went missing in New Hope, Pennsylvania. I worked the overnight shift at a Wawa in the area, and from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. we get all types. Normal obnoxious drunks, cops, and the occasional construction worker in the morning for their coffee. So when yet another customer came in covered in dirt, I figured he was just a hard-working man in a blue-collar job. He had been in before, so we made small talk, and he went on his way. That happened on Friday. I didn't see him on Saturday, but then Sunday he was in again. He got food and a drink, and after the normal "Hi, how are you?" he went on his way again. Monday comes, and I'm working like normal when a few cops come in for coffee. You can tell something's wrong. "We got a lead on those missing teens," they said solemnly. "We're searching a farm down the road." All of our hearts sank. It had been days since they went missing, so we were slowly losing hope, but this confirmed our worst suspicions. The cops were out there all night, stopping in occasionally to update us. Whether or not they were actually supposed to, who knows? They brought in dogs and eventually found them, 12 feet down and covered in concrete. It was bad. At the scene, they could only identify 2 of the teens based on their clothing, but there were enough bones to imply that all 4 were down there. Everyone was devastated. Then the cops asked for our security tapes. Why? We asked, confused. We haven't had anyone suspicious. It was then that they revealed the killer. A guy named Cosmo DiNardo had in fact been in our store Friday night, and again on Sunday. His cousin actually helped him kill, but he wasn't in the store. The dirt-covered man was a murderer. I was floored. When I left work, I looked up a picture of the man they arrested. It was him. He was covered in dirt because he had just buried the bodies, and I had made small talk and wished him a good day. Part 2. I've struggled with mental issues for most of my life, and have ended up in mental hospitals because of it a couple times now. While there, I made a couple of good friends, and we would tell each other stories and random things about ourselves. One of my friends had briefly been in jail with Cosmo DiNardo. Apparently, even though he seemed completely normal when I met him, he's completely lost his mind, lashing out and talking to himself. The whole shtick. A couple years ago, I lived in an apartment complex with a gorgeous bike path behind it. It eventually ended up at a park on both ends. I was thrilled about it as I'd just gotten my wonderful dog and walked her frequently on this path. The path was very straight and long, so you could basically see anyone on the path at any time. It was surrounded by a canopy of trees and foliage, so it was nice and shady in the summer. One day I'm walking her, just like normal, and I see a silhouette far ahead on the path that makes me stop and look. Describing this to my then partner, it literally looked like some sort of twisted up creature from a video game, bent in weird angles and seemingly staggering. It was too far away to tell exactly what it was, or which way it was going, so I just uneasily kept walking. I could eventually tell whatever it was walking my way, and as I got closer, I saw it was just an old man, which relieved me. Not that I actually thought there was a monster on the path in broad daylight, but it had me a bit anxious. He was moving at a snail's pace in very strange motions, and I felt bad about thinking he was so scary, because I figured he was just old and had some difficulties with mobilities. He was fairly dirty and skinny. What really freaked me out is when we crossed paths. My dog is ridiculously friendly. She literally has jumped into strangers' vehicles and is super happy to greet everyone. At this point, I've never seen her behave like the following. When we finally were within a couple yards, he stopped. My dog looked up as if she just noticed him, and her demeanor immediately changed. She tried to pull me away in the opposite direction gently, and gave me very direct looks, glancing at the man, and then back to me. He looked at me and said, "Is this your little dog?" I sort of went, "Haha, yeah." He proceeds to, in the most deadpan tone possible, tell a knock-knock style joke about dogs. I fake a laugh and try to keep moving. He repeats the joke again in the same deadpan way, just staring at us. Finally, I tug my dog a bit harder and pull her past him and say goodbye. As we get past, my dog suddenly spins around, putting herself between him and I, bares teeth and loudly gives a growl at him, backing away. At this point, I'm so freaked out because of how my dog is acting. I don't even scold her and I start jogging with her, until I reach a clearing to get off the path and double back to my house. I never saw him again, and I have no idea what might be wrong with him, but everything in my dog and I was telling us to leave.